Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't, I'm EDJ. And so yeah, Caesar was, busy in Egypt, doing Cleopatra and, basically dealing with the whole siege and whatnot. So while he was doing that, the world was falling apart as, you know, a foreign king, I forget his name, but, a foreign king starts attacking Rome. Mark Antony sucking at politics at Rome. The Pompeians are building strength. Basically, everything's falling apart. So Caesar, being the mad lad he is, goes on to fix the world essentially, and we're gonna be learning about his great exploits, through many battles. So, yeah, let's get to it, shall we? If you would like to see the original video, the link I always put graciously in the description down below. I give credit where it is always due. And without any further ado, let us get right into it, shall we?
It was late in the year 47 BCE, and Julius Caesar had just barely survived the siege of Alexandria by installing a Roman ally on the Egyptian throne. He had prevailed against Pompey in the Roman Civil War a year earlier, but as reality set in, it was becoming clear that his victory was shallower than originally thought. While Caesar was busy in Egypt, the old order in their various forms began to creep back in and fray at his conquests. This fraying allowed three major crises to emerge. First, an allied foreign king turned against Rome in hopes of recapturing his father's lost territory. Second, politicians back in Rome were up to their old tricks, using street violence to push for radical political reform. Third, a recalcitrant Pompeian faction under the leadership of Cato had begun the process of rebuilding in North Africa. It was looking like Caesar would have to win the civil war for a second time. But first things first, a foreign king had invaded a Roman province. If Caesar simply ignored this threat, drumming up political support for anything else would become extremely difficult. So, off to Asia Minor. The king in question was a guy named Pharnaces of Bosporus, one of the sons of Mithridates the Great. Ever the opportunist, Pharnaces went rogue during the Civil War and captured a huge chunk of Roman territory. Departing Egypt, Caesar set a breakneck pace up the Mediterranean coast, foregoing supplies for the sake of speed. Pharnaces knew that Caesar was dealing with a whole bunch of crises at once, and so offered Caesar a few minor concessions if he would just agree to leave him alone. Not only did Caesar reject this offer, but he rejected any further offers to negotiate. If you remember, he had just given away an entire Roman province in a negotiated settlement with the Queen of Egypt, so it would be a pretty bad look if he turned around and did the exact same thing with a foreign invader. There would be no negotiated peace. Caesar advanced further and further into Asia Minor. Eventually, Caesar and Pharnaces encountered each other near the town of Zela. The two armies deployed across a steep valley, each on their own separate hill. This would be the beginning of a weeks or even months-long process where each side would engage in subtle maneuvers in hopes of gaining a slight tactical advantage. Caesar was uniquely good at this aspect of warfare, and it's fair to assume that he was walking in there with a fairly detailed game plan. But Pharnaces had something else in mind.
I remember Pharnaces just books it. He just charges, and it catches Caesar off guard because he didn't expect someone to do something so tactically unsound, so he ends up laughing at this.
His first move was to have his army advance straight down the hill and into the valley. We are told that when Caesar saw this, he burst out laughing. He turned to his advisors and told them that this was an extremely obvious fake-out, and that Pharnaces must think that they were a bunch of idiots if he thought that some weird aggressive posturing would scare them off their hill. But when Pharnaces' army reached the foot of the Roman hill, they didn't turn back. One imagines the smile fading from Caesar's face. All of his preparation was for naught. The entire campaign would come down to this moment. The Romans sounded the alarm.
That is hilarious that Pharnaces got the drop on Caesar by doing something that Caesar thought was stupid. He was like, he's obviously just joking around. No way anyone could do something this dumb. He's trying to scare us. And then, like, Pharnaces is getting closer. He's like, oh, wait a minute. Oh man, like he was caught off. Like Pharnaces, oddly enough, got kind of an advantage here, mainly because Caesar was just so stunned, right? He was so gobsmacked.
The majority of Caesar's army were off in the distance, building the camp, but there were just enough legionaries milling about to throw together a crude, disorganized line. When Pharnaces' army charged, this line was there to meet them. The Roman line buckled. For a moment, there was panic behind the Roman lines, as it looked as if they were going to be completely overrun. Fortunately for the Romans, the moment passed, as legionaries from the camp were able to reinforce the line and stop the bleeding. But now what? The Romans were fighting for their lives and operating entirely without a plan. Pharnaces had a whole bunch of chariots at his disposal, which apparently had been kitted out to be used as heavy cavalry. These chariots now began to crash into the weak sections of the Roman line. The Romans had not considered how to counter attacks like this, and so they had no choice but to ignore the chariots for the time being. The only thing that the Romans really had going for them was the fact that they were fighting downhill. They basically leaned into this advantage and began to use brute force to push forward as best they could. As the day wore on, the Romans were able to push Pharnaces' army all the way down the hill. Suddenly, there was an unexpected breakthrough on the Roman right. The Romans immediately rushed in to fill the gap. It wasn't very long before Pharnaces' center collapsed as well, which sent the entire army into full flight. Pharnaces would be dead within a matter of days. His successors offered Caesar their unconditional surrender. Everybody, including Caesar, had assumed that the reconquest of Asia Minor would be a year or years long grind. In the end, the entire campaign was over in something like 5 days. Shocking.
Dude, talk about a lucky break. Caesar, like, Pharnaces almost had an advantage there just because he got Caesar so unaware. Caesar was like, alright, we're gonna have to do this song and dance. And Pharnaces like, nope. He just charged. I kind of find that hilarious. But either way, it worked out in Caesar's favor. It's like, okay, that's cool. I can focus on other things now.
But as we've seen, this victory had very little to do with Caesar, and everything to do with Pharnaces' recklessness. That being said, Caesar was never one to squander a propaganda opportunity, and so in his next report to the Senate, he wrote an open letter, which simply contained the following words. Wayne?
I came, I saw, and I conquered. One of the most hardest lines in all of history.
Wiki. This is usually translated as, I came, I saw, I conquered. He also had pamphlets distributed in Rome that pointed out how Pompey's eastern campaign had taken years, while his had taken days. Cheeky. Caesar had dealt with the first major crisis, but his work wasn't done. Roman politics were still spinning out of control, and the Pompeians in North Africa were still gearing up for a brand new civil war. It would be impossible for any long-term planning to take place until these issues were dealt with. Caesar set sail for Italy. He had been away for nearly 3 years.
Earn a $10 Salon Reward Certificate after one bath or groom at PetSmart.
Along the way, he decided that his next priority would be the Pompeians in North Africa. The Roman Civil War had already ended once with Pompey's murder. That probably should have been the end of hostilities, but for whatever reason, maybe Caesar's inattentiveness, maybe the quality of the Pompeian leadership, the old order was able to re-establish itself in North Africa and set the stage for a second civil war. Caesar started to make preparations for a crossing to North Africa. During his time, Caesar kept himself busy by issuing instructions to his allies back in Rome. I'm not going to get into Roman politics right now, because if I do, we're all going to turn into Zardoz skeletons, but we'll circle back to this when the time's right. One thing that I do need to mention here is that Caesar had a legion mutiny on him. The reason for this is that Caesar had made significant promises to his oldest legions if they would agree to delay their retirement until after the Civil War. That had been several years ago. Now, after winning the Civil War, Caesar had delivered on exactly 0 of his promises, and was now gearing up for yet another campaign. They were right to be upset. Caesar went out to meet the mutineers, and after an emotional back and forth, he told them that for their loyalty over the years, they were free to retire whenever they wished. This unconditional offer came as a shock to the mutineers. Caesar followed this up by humbly asking if they would consider going on one last campaign with him. After that, they could retire in peace, and he would devote the next years of his life to fulfilling every one of his promises. Upon receiving that specific commitment, the mutineers agreed to go on one last campaign.
Telling you, Caesar's the master of handling like mutinies, man. It's like, well, guys, I know I said like one last campaign like 3 years ago, but how about just one more? And they're like, Caesar, why not? Why not one more? I'm just imagining Alexander the Great. He's like, come on, guys, let's just keep going east. Come on, let one more nation to conquer, then we can go back to Greece. Man, these guys, man, they're pushed to their limits.
Time was of the essence. The mutiny had shown Caesar that his most experienced legions would not tolerate any more dilly-dallying. A plan was hatched to set sail with whatever legions were ready to go. The rest would just have to catch up whenever they could. It was customary for the Romans to kick off a voyage like this with an animal sacrifice. On this occasion, the bull selected for the sacrifice had an IQ of like 1,000,000, and so when it caught sight of the knife, it got all turned up and was able to break free of its restraints. When the Romans tried to calm the bull down, it zigged, and then it zagged, and then it booked it off into the distance, becoming the freest bull who ever lived. This,
you know, as someone who likes animals and hates seeing them die, I'm kind of really happy that happened. Those poor bulls who died so many times. This bull was like, not gonna be me, man. I'll be the one who lives. I'll be the one who makes it. Oh man. Yeah, I'm not a fan of animal death, so that made me happy. I'm almost afraid to unpause the video, but like, I'm afraid to be like, oh, they caught the bull and then they killed it. I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that's the last we hear of the bull.
This wasn't a great omen, but whatever. The fleet set sail on schedule.
Okay, but thank goodness the bull lived. Thank goodness. But yeah, I remember this. It does not start off well. Caesar lands with just very numerically outnumbered, and he almost like, it almost comes back to fight him. If it wasn't for his genius maneuvering, like, it would have went even worse. But he does not start off hot in Africa, that's for sure.
But here's the thing. The Romans were notoriously bad sailors, and during the crossing, ill winds blew the entire fleet wildly off course. After several stressful days at sea, only a small fraction of Caesar's original fleet remained. When the group caught sight of land, they decided to make camp on the beach so that the rest of the fleet could track them down. But when Caesar came ashore, his foot got caught on the lip of the boat.
Yeah, I remember this. Like, man, talk about all the bad signs, right? The bull escapes, and here Caesar falls. But to quickly save the situation, I heard the story that he like apparently kissed the ground and was acting happy. Like, he basically played it off like, you know, he was just desperate to reach the land first, not that he fell. That's the version I heard, so I don't know.
And he fell face first onto the beach. Thinking quickly, he bounced to his feet with his hands full of pebbles and shouted for the benefit of his soldiers, "Africa, I have hold of you now."
You know, Caesar has his moments where he can be kind of funny. And yeah, just to quickly boost morale, you have to give it to Caesar. The man thinks on his feet, man.
After Pompey's death, the senator Cato seized control of the Pompeian faction and pledged to raise new armies and restart the civil war in North Africa as soon as possible. Cato was not a military guy, and so he handed command of the Pompeian army over to a guy named Scipio, who, yes, was a descendant of that other Scipio from the Second Punic War. In fact, there was a rumor going around saying that
Yes, according to legend, a Scipio can be defeated in Africa, so what does Caesar do? He brings his own Scipio. He's like, hey, there's another Scipio, I'm gonna have him, so the legendary power of Scipios cancel each other out. Oh man.
to prophecy, it was impossible to defeat a Scipio in North Africa. No such prophecy existed, but the rumor persisted anyway. Caesar was aware that this could be a damaging piece of propaganda, and so he plucked a distant Scipio cousin out of obscurity and threw him into the military equivalent of middle management. The last major Pompeian that we should be aware of is Caesar's old right-hand man Labienus, who was...
Labienus almost beat Caesar. Well, maybe not beat, maybe that's a bit too strong, but he actually, I think, when he and Caesar face off for the first time, Labienus has him on the ropes. And when we get to it, I'll explain, but it is something that makes me disappointed in Labienus, because he makes a decision that I'm like, you fool. We'll get there when we get there.
Serving as one of Scipio's officers. What's weird about this is that Labienus was undeniably the better general, but Cato preferred Scipio due to his conservative politics and his prestigious family name.
Yeah, you can tell Cato is not making the right calls, because Labienus should honestly just be in charge at this point. At least in complete, he should have complete control of the military at this point. He's like the perfect man. He has the experience under Caesar. He knows how Caesar thinks. Like, Labienus is obviously the right choice, but politics, man. Friggin' politics.
Cato was also able to solicit the support of a Roman ally, King Juba of Numidia, who brought his world-class Numidian cavalry to the Pompeian cause. Back on the beach, most of the scattered Caesarian fleet had been able to track Caesar down, but there was already a problem. In their haste to cross the Mediterranean, the Caesarians brought virtually no food with them. This seems like bad planning, and it was, but the legions had kinda forced Caesar to set sail before the invasion was 100% ready.
You know, with all the time Caesar's almost been starved out, you'd think they would be used to starving at this point, right? Like, I feel like every Caesar campaign, he's always running low on supplies. He always needs to find a way to feed his men. Like, Caesar, at this point, you need to pack, like, all the food in Rome. But man, you think they would be used to it? Like, well, we've been in this situation 1,000 times already. I'm sure Caesar will find a way to get us fed, you know? Like, at this point, you think they would just have complete confidence, right?
Ready. Food and reinforcements were coming, they just weren't here yet. In the meantime, they would just have to live off the land. When King Juba of the Numidians became aware of this weakness, he immediately launched a series of raids along the coast. This activity made foraging virtually impossible. One of these raids has a real truth is stranger than fiction quality to it, so if you'll indulge me, I'll include it here. Caesar's army included a bunch of Gallic cavalry, and these dudes were sitting around a fire one night, talking, maybe drinking, whatever, when out of the darkness, a North African local approached the fire and began playing the flute and doing a little dance. The Gallic cavalry dudes were super impressed by this, and a small crowd gathered to watch the performance. The purpose of the music and of the crowd was to drown out the sound of hooves. King Juba's Numidian cavalry charged out of the darkness, right into the crowd. Before the Roman camp could respond, the Numidians slipped away. Raids like this were a daily threat, which was...
Wow. I'm telling you, real life is more funny and entertaining than even fiction now that I've really kind of established myself sort of as a history, maybe not history YouTuber, a guy who reacts to history. That's much better. A history buff, if you would. But you know, I'm a fan of like the Song of Ice and Fire novels by George R. Martin, but like, you know, I just find that lately real life is just more entertaining than any fantasy novel could ever provide me, because just the wild crap that has happened in our history as a species, fiction can't even compare. Even the best written fiction, it can't match the unhinged entertainment that is real life history. But that's the funniest thing. It's like, yo, dude, look, this dude's like putting on a concert and then just like it jumped. Wow.
Super frustrating. Caesar decided to change things up by taking half of his army and marching inland to capture a few North African desert towns. Remember, he didn't necessarily need to defeat the Pompeians immediately, he just needed to keep his army fed until reinforcements arrived. Capturing a town or two would accomplish that. A few kilometers into the desert, the Caesarians noticed a dust cloud coming up behind them. It was the entire Numidian army, under the command of Caesar's old right-hand man, Labienus. The Caesarians turned and prepared for the fight of their lives. Marching inland had been a huge mistake. Labienus had a ton of cavalry with him, and he used this to his advantage by having them ride out and occupy all of the hills surrounding Caesar's position. He knew that Caesar was uniquely good at playing up small tactical differences, and with this one move, he took that option off the table. Given the...
Dude, I'm telling you, Labienus should have been in charge. The man... Forgive me, I apologize, but I'm telling you, man, Labienus just knew what to do. And like here in this battle, an impressive showing, but you're about to see in the end why I'm frustrated with him. But like, yeah, the first part of this battle, he has Caesar on the ropes, like he probably has come closer than most in defeating Caesar, which just shows why Labienus is considered one of the best of the era. But he's obviously, I wouldn't put him completely on Caesar's and Pompey's level, because he does make an error in this battle that even to this point, I'm like frustrated at it. I'm like, come on, Labienus. I thought you knew better, but we'll get there when we get there.
Size and makeup of Labienus's army, Caesar was primarily concerned with being flanked, and so he deployed his infantry in a long, thin line. Labienus and the Numidians advanced, and as they did so, their cavalry fanned out wider and wider and wider. Only now did it become clear that Labienus had been hiding his numbers by packing his cavalry tightly together. Caesar was much more badly outnumbered than originally thought. Then, Labienus attacked everywhere at once. Infantry in the center, cavalry on the wings. Caesar's line was already as wide and as thin as possible, so they were unable to stop the Numidian cavalry on the wings. Before too long, the Caesarians were completely encircled. Caesar turned every other cohort around so that they could face attacks from two directions at once, but this didn't do much good. Labienus's cavalry refused to let themselves get pinned down. They attacked, wheeled, attacked again, threw javelins, shot arrows, basically behaved as unpredictably as possible. The Caesarians had no answer to tactics like this, and as the day wore on, they began to waver. During a break in the fight,
I'm telling you, man, Labienus had him on the ropes here. Like, the man opened this battle, and like for the most part, throughout most of it, really, there's a good chance he could have really beat Caesar here, and we could remember Labienus much more favorably, right? But yeah, but again, this was an impressive showing, getting Caesar. securing the hills, making Caesar spread his forces as wide as possible. I'm just telling you, Labienus, man, this might be his most impressive showing. Like, the man was gifted himself.
Fighting, Labienus took off his helmet and rode up and down the front line. He began to taunt the Caesarian soldiers, shouting things like, "How's it going, recruit? Don't you boys look dashing? Caesar sure led you into a dangerous situation. Wish I could help." Mind you, Labienus would have known many of these soldiers by name, making these taunts all the more biting. Labienus knew the truth. He was winning the battle. Caesar was losing. It was only a matter of time. Caesar came up with a radical plan. On his signal, he had the legions throw their javelins and charge in both directions at once. Labienus's encircling cavalry didn't want to be pinned down, so they wheeled and pulled back. This created an opening. Caesar ordered an immediate withdrawal. But it wasn't that simple. The Caesarians moved as quickly as possible, but it wasn't long before Labienus's Numidian cavalry caught up to them. Caesar's exhausted legions turned and prepared to fight the second battle of the day. As Labienus and the Numidians closed in, the Caesarians went on the offensive. The infantry charged and refused to let the Numidians take the initiative. Labienus's Numidian cavalry continued to hit the Caesarians with javelins and arrows, but were forced to pull further and further back as the Caesarians continued to advance. During this onslaught, Labienus was probably thrown from his horse and injured. The Caesarians abruptly turned and began their second withdrawal of the day. Labienus was probably no longer in command, and
Yeah, okay, this is a little different, but with the Kings and Generals version of events, I was really frustrated with, because the way he put it, Labienus, obviously he mentioned he took off his helmet and started riding and just starting to trash talk everyone, and then he says that immediately, a Roman legionary saw Labienus, doing that, he caught his attention, and then he threw the javelin, hit Labienus off his horse. Though this one frames it very differently, but I was frustrated because I was like, Labienus, I was frustrated with that video in particular, not because Kings and Generals, I just mean Labienus. I'm like, Labienus, why? Like, you were winning, just keep your mouth shut and lead from the back, But, yeah, Labienus just had him on the ropes there, like, again, nothing but praise for Labienus. Like, I could see why people say he's on the level of Caesar or, like, Pompey for sure. Yeah, definitely. The man knew what he was doing. Unfortunately, he faltered at the end there, but still, an overall impressive showing.
and whoever succeeded him chose to let the Caesarians go. Some historians criticize this decision, but bear in mind that the other half of Caesar's army was only a few kilometers away. If the Numidians chased Caesar all the way back to the coast, they would almost certainly run into them. Much better to just take the win and let them go. Labienus had just defeated his old friend in open battle. The myth surrounding Caesar's skill as a general had been forever tarnished. Labienus must have been pretty happy with himself.
Man, I mean, Caesar has lost before. Is that true, that it apparently this battle tarnished his reputation that bad? Well, I guess up to this point, after the fall of Pompey, Caesar's kind of seen as the next big guy, right? Since Pompey, who many considered Caesar's better, is gone. So, yeah, I guess I would technically make Caesar just the new number one. And I guess Labienus defeating him shows he's not that infallible, so yeah, I could see that having an effect on how some people could view Caesar. So, good on you, Labienus. You definitely got that. I still don't know about taking off your helmet and exposing yourself, assuming that's Kings and Generals' way of telling us how it happened. This one, it doesn't seem like a complete mistake on Labienus's part. Again, right, I'm gonna have to do my own research, but Yeah, overall, still can't deny Labienus' skill, right?
The Caesarians returned to the coast, exhausted, demoralized, hungry, and unsure as to what to do next. So long as Labienus continued to patrol the desert, any further inland incursions would be impossible. Months passed. The Caesarians spent this time huddled together in a defensive crouch on the coast. The only thing that kept them from starving was the fact that they found a hidden food stockpile belonging to a nearby town. Otherwise, the military dynamic remained unchanged. No word on the reinforcements from Italy. Over this period, a daily ritual developed, where Scipio would deploy for battle just outside the Caesarian camp, and Caesar would decline the offer. Caesar feared that an attack may happen at any time, and in desperation brought all of his sailors down off the ships and pressed them into the infantry. You might be asking yourself why Scipio didn't attack at this time. There's a good reason. Scipio's basic military strategy said that a stalemate in North Africa was basically as good as a victory. The Pompeians correctly assessed that Caesar's political support was shallow, and believed that a prolonged North African campaign would shatter Caesar's reputation and allow Pompeian politicians to reassert themselves back in Rome. Say what you will about Scipio, but his strategy was coherent. At long last, those reinforcements from Italy showed up. 2 additional legions, bringing Caesar's total up to rough parity with Scipio at 8 legions apiece. Caesar was still technically outnumbered if you counted King Juba's 4 additional legions, but at least now Caesar could get out of his defensive crouch. Caesar surprised Scipio by marching off and seizing a set of nearby hills. Labienus kept up the pressure by launching a series of hit-and-run cavalry raids. The pressure worked, because after a day or so, Caesar abandoned the hills and advanced on a nearby town in hopes of restocking on food. Scipio wisely put his army in between the Caesarians and the town, and Caesar was forced to pull back. The Caesarians were running out of options, and the Pompeians were slowly tightening their grip. But Caesar was in for some luck. 2 more legions arrived in North Africa, bringing his total up to 10. Now Caesar began to act more aggressively. Both armies deployed on favorable ground, but neither side wanted to be the one to initiate battle. The Caesarians turned and marched away. The Pompeian army followed. Finally, Caesar and his legions approached the coastal city of Thapsus and began building siege equipment. It's unclear how serious Caesar was about actually storming the city, but he knew that the threat of doing so might push Scipio into attacking. The Pompeians closed in. Scipio encamped on the west. King Juba encamped on the south. Caesar would have to attack one of these positions if he wanted to withdraw again. The 2 armies deployed opposite each other. Each side occupied favorable ground, and just like before, each wanted the other to attack first. Scipio and King Juba and Labienus deployed with infantry in the center and cavalry on the wings. King Juba controlled 60 war elephants, and Scipio placed them in front of the line on the wings. These elephants would pose a unique challenge for the Caesarians. The Pompeians had a significant cavalry advantage, which made it pretty obvious where most of the action would be. Caesar moved his strongest and most experienced legions to the wings. In fact, there was a lot of internal debate as to who would get the honor of facing off against the elephants. In the end, Caesar tapped the veteran 5th Legion, who had served under him in Gaul, and put them on elephant duty on each wing. For most of the day, the 2 armies just stared at each other. Whoever attacked first would be at a slight disadvantage, and nobody wanted to take that risk. There are several different versions of what happened next. It all has to do with Caesar's veterans. Remember, Caesar had promised that this—
Oh yeah, I remember the veterans kind of forced Caesars to just attack, right? They take the initiative. I mean, it works out for Caesar, obviously, but yeah, it was not what he was thinking of doing.
This would be their last campaign. For months, they had suffered humiliation after humiliation at the hands of Labienus and others, and now retirement was one decisive battle away. They were grumpy and impatient. The veterans on Caesar's right attacked without orders. Later, they would claim that they detected a weakness in Scipio's line, but I don't buy it. It's worth mentioning here that one account claims that Caesar suffered from a seizure earlier in the day and spent several hours recovering in his tent. If this happened, it would explain some of the miscommunication going on here. Caesar suffered from seizures for his entire life, but this is the only instance where his condition may have directly impaired his ability to command. When Caesar discovered that his right had moved to attack, he ordered the veterans to get back in line, but these orders were ignored. The right made contact with the enemy, and more neighboring units moved in to help. It quickly became clear that the battle could not be stopped. Caesar ordered an all-out attack, and rode forward to personally take command of the endangered right. Scipio's elephants charged. Caesar's legions had trained for this, and opened up.
Yeah, like, that's the thing about elephants, and it's amazing that even with this disastrous start that Caesar just pulls off the win. But, yeah, that's the thing about elephants. I heard that, like, I was kind of looking a little bit into war elephants, because I just find them an interesting, fascinating part of warfare, but, yeah, apparently they were used, like, you know, obviously more in the east, and were very useful, particularly in jungles. You know, but eventually with the rise of, like, you know, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Roman empires, you know, they were deployed more, and I think they were most useful as kind of like shock troops. I'm not sure I'm using that term correctly, but they were kind of put there to, you know, obviously shock the enemy, like these giant behemoths. You know, it's like, oh, how do we fight that? They were most effective when they were facing an enemy that didn't know how to deal with them, and ideally probably never dealt with them. So it was kind of like a morale breaker. But obviously, you know, enemies who were familiar with them, they kind of lose that big advantage when you're dealing with a foe that actually is familiar with them and knows how to handle them. And he didn't mention this, but Kings and Generals mentioned that Caesar brought some, you know, elephants, and that he trained his men, drilled them in how to frighten elephants away. And, you know, when I was watching Kings and Generals Pyrrhus of Epirus series, you know, Pyrrhus, you know, surprised the Roman twice in 2 battles against the Romans. He won mainly due to his elephants, you know, surprising them that the Romans had never seen elephants, and that was how he was able to secure 2 wins. But, you know, in the final battle between Pyrrhus and Rome, the Romans just threw a crapload of javelins, which the elephants hated, and it forced the elephants to run away, crashing into their own line. So obviously the elephants can be scared, and what's most effective is just throwing a lot of crap at them, and javelins. And Caesar, I think, does that. They just throw a lot of javelins, and these elephants go and crash. So, you know, yeah, they lose their luster when you become familiar with them, right? Your enemy becomes familiar with them. So, yeah.
Up holes in their line so that the elephants could pass through unharmed. The 5th Legion was waiting, spears in hand, just behind the Caesarian line. Their only job today would be to face this elephant charge head on. The battle dragged on for hours. The veterans on Caesar's left and right repulsed Labienus's cavalry again and again and again. The 5th Legion held their own against the elephants, but one source describes a horrific scene with elephants throwing soldiers with their trunks and stomping on anybody who fell to the ground. Nightmare stuff. Hours passed, and the sun began.
I can't imagine being stomped on by a freaking elephant. That's gotta be an awful way to go, man.
To set. Bloodied and bruised, the 5th Legion threw one last volley of javelins, which at last caused the war elephants to panic and flee. What followed was absolute chaos. The elephants crashed straight.
Yep, just like I said. And boy, isn't it baller to fight elephants, right? You're dueling against, like, what, the biggest, heaviest land mammal, I think, you know, so like these guys were basically fighting monsters, right? If I don't know how familiar, you know, but point is, like, yeah, it's kind of baller. You're just dueling elephants. It's kind of cool. Yeah, I mean, you know, when you're winning, obviously, when they're throwing you around and stomping on you, I think you would have preferred to fight a normal person, but, you know.
Right into the Pompeian line, causing it to crumble. Those who held their ground quickly fell under a renewed push from Caesar's legions. The Caesarians then descended into what can only be described as a killing frenzy, where many thousands of disarmed Pompeian prisoners were murdered on the spot. Caesar frantically issued orders telling the legions to leave the prisoners alone, but these were just outright ignored. Caesar completely lost control of his army. By the time the madness passed, virtually no prisoners were left alive. In the days that followed, Scipio and King Juba of the Numidians would take their own lives. Labienus, ever resourceful, was able to escape with some survivors and set sail for Spain, where he vowed to continue the fight. But, of course, Labienus and Scipio were not the leaders of the Pompeian faction. That man was Cato, who was headquartered in the nearby town of Utica. When Cato learned of the resounding Pompeian defeat at Thapsus, he took his own life. The details surrounding Cato's death have been highly romanticized, which I don't want to play into here. However, this incident would become famous within Caesar's lifetime, and so I should mention it in passing. Cato stabbed himself in the stomach, inexplicably survived, and then later ripped open his stitches and disemboweled himself with his bare hands. It was a gruesome death. With the passing of...
What an awful way to go. I don't even like Cato. Like, Cato's, like, I find him kind of annoying, because I just think he's just... He comes across to me as just a dude who's just petty against Caesar. Like, some of the other people against Caesar, I actually do think they were fighting for the Republic, but Cato just strikes me as just someone who just was driven completely by hate. I could be wrong. You know, I'm not gonna pretend I'm an expert on Cato. It's just, I don't know, that's kind of how he strikes me, and it's kind of annoying. Then again, I'm gonna do some research off as soon as this video ends, and by the time this video comes out, it'll be months. Like, I'm recording this at May 30, guys. Like, by the time that you see this video, my opinions here will be completely different whenever this video comes out. So yeah, I'll be in a completely different mind state.
Of Cato, the Roman Civil War ended for the second time. Although Labienus and other Pompeians survived, it's safe to say that for the first time, Caesar was in full control of Roman territory. He was finally free to return to the city of Rome and begin the hard work of forging a lasting peace, if such a thing was even possible.
So another great telling of by Historia Civilis. It's really late right now, so I'm just gonna end the video now. But you know, I can't wait to wake up tomorrow and binge some more. So I'll see you all in the next videos. Bye everyone.